Hello and welcome to another episode of the DVD Graveyard. Tonight we're going to be taking a look at Willow Creek from 2014, which was written and directed by Bobcat Goldthwait, of all people, which actually really surprised me whenever I actually found that out, years ago whenever I first saw this, because I really only knew Bobcat Goldthwait as like an actor and like a comedian, and I know he's directed a few other films, but none of them are really kind of in this genre really, or especially horror films like this. This film was actually really well done. I want to say that kind of starting off the bat. And I want to say, this movie right here is it's one of those where I either hear people really like this movie and give it, a lot of credit, say it's a very intelligent, very smart movie, or I hear people say that it's the dumbest movie they've ever seen, it's idiotic, there's nothing going on in it, it's boring, all that good stuff. And, to be honest with you, I really like this movie. I think it's great. It's probably one of my favorite Sasquatch movies. And if you know me, I'm a guy that likes a good Sasquatch horror film. I know I talked about Abominable a couple months ago. That's another one of my favorites. But this is definitely a really good one. But I understand where people are coming from with all their complaints. Like, I can definitely see that. 100%, I get it, but again, I will defend this movie because I do enjoy it. I think it's a great time. I think it suffers from a lot of the same things that like the Blair Witch Project, for example, which you're probably going to hear me compare this movie quite a bit to the Blair Witch Project in this video because it plays out very similarly to that film. But I think that it suffers a lot from what that movie did in just the fact that we don't really get a lot of resolution in this movie, and we don't really I know everybody's, we don't see the creature, we don't see, that whole thing, which is not really a big deal for me, honestly. But much like the Blair Witch Project, I think this movie does such a fantastic job at building tension and has, very realistic feeling characters. The movie just feels very, very real to me, which I always think is a big plus, especially for a found footage movie, because found footage movies notoriously, to me, they're really good or they're really bad, and what kind of plays into that is they're either really fake feeling or they're very, very real feeling, which this movie to me feels very realistic, which is one thing I like about this movie quite a bit. I think it's a very well done film, very well shot movie. They actually have a reason for it being found footage, unlike a lot of other found footage horror movies where it's just the guy holding the camera for no apparent reason and will not turn it off. That's just me. But I think that this movie, I think it deserves a lot more love than what it gets. So like I said, especially if you're a Sasquatch horror film fan. So anyway, before I get into the actual review, I'm going to read the plot synopsis off the back of this DVD. This is the Dark Sky Films DVD release, which I actually got really cheap, and I think you can still actually get it pretty cheap if I'm not mistaken. I got it for like $10 several years ago on eBay. I bought it alongside the film Exists. I ordered them both at the same time, and I actually watched them, those two movies kind of back to back pretty often. I think they make for a really good double feature, as well as this movie actually pairs really well with the movie Frogman as well, which I also talked about a couple months back. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. A young couple find themselves face to face with a terrifying evil when they venture into the heart of Bigfoot country in Willow Creek. Director Bobcat Goldthwait's unique spin on the horror genre. Looking to make a splash with his research videos into the existence of Bigfoot, Jim and his girlfriend Kelly take a camping trip to the mountains surrounding Willow Creek, California, a small town where infamous footage of the supposed Sasquatch was filmed. Before long, the headstrong couple are lost in the woods and discover that someone or something is stalking them. With each passing night bringing unknowable danger, the two must use all of their cunning to try and make it out of the forest alive. So this movie kind of starts out, and let me do this first. Let me mention the cast, because we have a very small cast in this movie. I mean, we're mainly following two people, and that is Bryce Johnson, who plays Jim, and Alexi Gilmore, who plays Kelly. And I just want to shout out to both of these actors. They do such a great job in this movie. I don't think this movie would have worked as well without them in this, because I think that they are such fine actors, especially Alexi Gilmore. Like, she steals the show in this movie. She shows terror like perfectly. I mean, and portrays it very realistically. I mean, she truly feels like she's scared in this movie. And another thing on top of that, they are a couple in this movie, and they really feel like a real couple. I mean, they bicker and they kind of complain, back and forth about stuff. Like they feel like two people who've lived together for a long time. Like so they feel very very genuine. And I like the kind of dynamic that they have where Kelly is kind of the skeptic. She doesn't believe in Bigfoot or anything like that. She's just there because she's being supportive of her boyfriend Jim, who's wanting to film this documentary, and she's just there for him. So she's kind of busting his balls on some of the Bigfoot stuff, and it kind of pisses him off. So he kind of gets smart ass with her, and he's kind of a dick to her sometimes. But she just kind of rubs it off, a little bit, and it's just their dynamic just works so well in this movie. So props to both of these actors in this film. I think that they are really what sells this movie for me personally. Again, I don't think it would have been as strong without the two of them. So like I said, when this movie starts out, we're introduced to both of these characters, and they're driving through the mountains of California. They're traveling to this town of Willow Creek, which is the Bigfoot capital of the world. And again, it plays out very similarly to again the Blair Witch Project or the film Frogman, something like that, where there's just a lot of kind of setup. They're kind of walking around the town, they're interviewing different people, getting Bigfoot stories. They see this giant carved Bigfoot. They're eating Bigfoot sandwiches or burgers or whatever it was at this store. So a lot of setup, kind of going into this. So this film does start out kind of slow, to be honest with you, but it kind of helps to kind of build that tension later on in the film. And they ultimately, they kind of go out and they end up seeing like these missing posters, from the area, and there's just a lot of kind of stuff that's kind of, hinting at things to come later in the film. And where they're going to this area where the famous Patterson-Gimlin footage was filmed, which if you're a Bigfoot enthusiast or, even if you're not, to be honest with you, I'm sure everyone has seen that classic image of the Sasquatch from the Patterson-Gimlin footage. It's probably one of those iconic Bigfoot things ever. Anyway, that's the spot where they're going. They're going to this place where this footage was shot. And kind of leading up to this, everyone is telling them, it's really thick woods up there. It's way off in the back country. They're not really going to have a lot of help. There's no cell phone reception. Just a lot of kind of stuff telling them that they shouldn't do this, more or less. Especially because Jim is not exactly a backwoods type guy. He's just kind of going into this a little bit unprepared. And again, Kelly's just kind of following him because she trusts him and she wants to be there for him, and she's being supportive. So they end up going and they encounter this guy who kind of tells them that they should turn back, that they don't need to camp up there. They need to get the fuck out of there. They don't belong there. A lot of stuff like that. And they kind of ignore him anyway, and they go further in, and they end up going into these woods. They hike in there. They're filming and talking, and he's kind of filming segments for his documentary. Just it's a lot of setup, but in this beautiful location too. I mean, this forest that they're in is absolutely gorgeous. I love it, and it really. I really like it because it reminds me of going camping. It's a good little summertime movie, and I like actually, if I get the chance, I'll actually take this movie with me if I go camping or something, because I think it works a lot better in that instance. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So what kind of starts to happen? This is where the movie kind of starts to pick up, is they set up camp and they're in the tent overnight. And they're kind of talking, and they're asleep, or they go to sleep, and they're woken up in the middle of the night by this knocking on these trees. And Jim kind of wakes up, and he's all excited because he hears what's going on. And Kelly kind of wakes up, and she's nervous, like she doesn't know what's going on. And we kind of start to hear the whooping sounds, the whoo, woo, out in the middle of the woods, which, this part is actually really great. Again, props to the actors, especially Alexi Gilmore, because she feels so real in this. Both of them do, because, of course, Jim's over there giddy like a little kid because he's actually getting some stuff, on camera that's going on. But Kelly is kind of like, she's nervous, like she doesn't really know what's going on, so she's kind of asking Jim questions, and you can kind of see the skepticism sort of leaving her a little bit in this instance, which again, it's something that I really like, and that is portrayed really well in this film. Just again, they're doing such a fine job acting, and the stuff just kind of starts to pick up kind of from here when they're in this tent. And honestly, this is probably the best sequence in the entire movie. is and you know, it's a lot of sound. Like, I mean, that's really kind of all we're getting is it's sound with the reactions of the actors. So again, I can see how somebody could say that this kind of bores them a little bit, but like, if you really get into this movie, you turn off all the lights, you have some good surround sound, or even better, if you have some headphones or something like that. You know, if you really get into this, it is a little unnerving, like to kind of put yourself in that situation, especially like if you're able to actually watch this while you're camping or something like that. You know, if you're in this situation in a tent or whatever, and you can watch this with headphones on, like, for example, I've got a little portable DVD player. Oh my gosh, that's probably the best way to watch this. It would make me so uncomfortable, you know, to just be out in the middle of nowhere, you know, at the mercy of the forest, no cell phone service, you know, at the mercy of this creature. So anyway, like I said, this is probably the best scene in the movie because things just start to escalate. You know, the knocking gets louder, the hooting and hollering out in the woods starts to get a little bit louder. Of course, Kelly's just getting more and more concerned. She's leaning in closer and closer to Jim. And of course, they decide to turn the light off because they don't want to, you know, attract any attention. And this is, you know, again, where it gets even more kind of nerve-wracking. As soon as they turn the light off, the footsteps kind of get closer, and we hear something moving around even closer around the tent. And then something lets out this long howl, and I mean, it's spine tingling. If you're able to watch this in the right instance, you know, and get the full effect of the sound, and just the look of terror on Kelly's face just sells the whole thing. Because I mean, that is again how it would be, you know, if you were in that situation. That's just horrifying, and especially Jim follows it up with, you know, like, that's not human, you know, whatever it is. And again, he's just super giddy about this and happy and everything. But they slowly start to get a little bit more nervous because, like I said, after the lights go off, something starts to come up to the tent. You know, we hear grunting, something's pushing on the tent, you know, moving the tent around, stuff like that. You know, they realize that this is not okay. You know, they're starting to kind of freak out a little bit. So Jim decides that in the morning they're going to leave. They're just going to abandon, you know, the documentary, and they're going to move on. They're going to leave and get out of there. So when they get up and they pack up all their stuff, they decide to leave, and they're walking, you know, hiking through these woods for hours and hours and hours. And this is where you can tell Kelly has had enough. I mean, she really starts to kind of lose her shit, which is understandable because, again, Jim kind of got them out there, you know, did not prepare for this, and got them, you know, lost, more or less. And again, plays out very similar to the Blair Witch Project. But again, you know, props to the actors. Again, Kelly truly feels like someone who's really in distress. Like, you can tell she doesn't want to just blow up on Jim, but you can tell she's like really close to it, and she's really kind of holding, like, everything in her is holding back because Jim's stopping to look at these footprints or to look at this piece of hair that's hanging off this tree, and she just wants to go home. Like, she just wants to get out of there. So again, I cannot give these actors props enough. Like, they are doing such a fantastic job. So ultimately, they are lost. They're lost out in the middle of these woods. They cannot find their way back. They end up just circling around, you know, in the middle of nowhere until it gets dark again. And they have another instance that later that night, things just start to escalate even more. They're even more terrified. You know, Jim is not having fun anymore with this. Kelly's really not having fun anymore. They just want to get the hell out of there. So that's kind of what it picks up to. They try to get out again the next morning. They're lost still. Can't find their way out. Of course, like I said, no cell phone reception, so they can't call anybody. So they're just stuck, and I mean, they're just going around in circles at this point. And it's stressful, you know. I mean, it really is. Like, it is a very realistic fear, you know. I mean, to have something out there, you know, in this forest that, you know, could potentially kill you if it wanted to, but and you're lost, and you have nothing to defend yourself. They have no weapons, anything like that. It's just a horrifying thought to really think about. So kind of what this boils down to, and I think that this is where it loses a lot of people, if I'm being honest with you, is at the ending. And I'll tell what happens in the ending, and then I'll kind of explain what happens, because it's one of those things that you're going to watch this movie and you're going to be like, what the hell happened? Because that's exactly what I thought. I had to actually go look it up and read about it. But once I did read about it and what it was supposedly going on, or at least what I'm taking from it at this point, it makes the ending that much darker darker and that much more chilling. So, at this point, they are unable to set up camp because, like, their supplies have been taken or have been destroyed or something like that. Like, the Sasquatch has destroyed all their stuff. So they are just kind of being pursued by this thing. And of course, we never see it. We do not see the Sasquatch the entire film. I'll go ahead and just say that you don't see it, but you hear it, and you kind of know what's going on just from context. And as they're running through the woods, they end up running into this naked woman out in the middle of the woods. And shortly after that, Jim is taken off camera and he is killed. We hear him killed off camera. And Kelly, ends up dropping the camera, and she is dragged off, into the woods, and is basically abducted by this Sasquatch. That's kind of where it leaves us off. The screen cuts to black, and we hear the whooping sounds again, in the darkness. And then we roll credits, and that is how this movie ends. So, like I said, I can see where that loses a lot of people because the movie ends very abruptly. I mean, like, it is over before you know it. I mean, it just drops like that. I mean, out of nowhere. It'll kind of take you off guard a little bit. You don't expect it to end where it does. So, like I said, the ending can be kind of confusing. So, from what my takeaway from this, like I read a little bit about it and got into it, and this is the one that actually makes sense. So, if you read kind of into like Sasquatch lore and stuff like that, there's this thing about the Sasquatches kidnapping women and using them for breeding purposes and things like that. So that is what I'm assuming the naked woman in the forest is she is basically a bride that this Sasquatch has taken and has tried to reproduce with, which is a horrifying thought because she is supposedly the same woman that is on a missing poster that we see earlier on in the film, if I did not mention that. So what this implies is that Kelly has been kidnapped, and she is now going to basically be bred by this Sasquatch. I mean, that is what she's being used for. And again, that is just such a horrifying concept, and that adds so much more depth to this ending, but nothing is explained. Again, it's just dropped on you like that, which I love. Like, I love that you can really kind of take your own interpretations from this, and now that, like, I have taken that interpretation of this film, and then that's what is kind of going on. Again, it makes it that much darker and that much more horrifying that's what happens at the end, is that she is taken by this creature and he's going to just do whatever he wants to with this tiny little woman, because Kelly's a little lady. I mean, she's a very skinny woman, and she's so nice and kind, like earlier in the movie. Again, props to her as an actress. She's so friendly and goofy and funny, and she's so supportive of Jim, and literally to take all of that and this is her fate makes it just awful, and you feel so bad for Kelly, like at the end. So that is what I took from this movie. So anyway, that is Willow Creek from 2014. This is not going to be for everyone. And again, I understand why people would dislike this movie, but I really enjoy it. I think it's a really great Sasquatch movie. It would definitely be on a list of some of my favorite Sasquatch movies. Maybe I'll do that at some point. I don't know. We'll see. But I have a fun time with it. If you get the chance, like I said, this DVD is pretty cheap to pick up, or it is streaming for free on Tubi if you want to check it out on there. But I highly recommend watching it with headphones or with at least a really good sound system. Like, sound is a big part of this movie, and I cannot overstate that enough. That is what is going to make or break this movie for you, is how you're able to hear it, not let alone see it. But I think it's a great time. Like I said, I usually pair this movie up with the film Exists, because if you don't like this movie, for those issues, like I said, you don't see the creature, you're kind of bored with it. It's very slow. If that's why you don't like it, Exist kind of fixes those problems. It's not as good of a film by any means. It's a lot more kind of cliche, and it's a very much more kind of what you'd expect out of a found footage movie. But it's definitely faster and it's more entertaining, where this is definitely a straightforward, grounded horror film. In my personal opinion, that was my takeaway. But I usually watch these movies kind of back to back, or I will watch this with like Frogman, because those movies feel very similar to me. Which I love Frogman, but anyway, that we talked about that here a while back. Anyway, I hope everyone enjoyed this review. Stay tuned for the next episode. As always, have a great rest of your night, and goodbye.